Okay, well, good morning, gentlemen. It's great to be back with you. It's been a bit for me to be here since I moved over to the Thursday night group, but happy to be back with you this morning. And so when I began this journey 1,326 days ago, I could not have anticipated where God would take me. We talk about this being so much more than just stopping our unwanted sex addiction behaviors and moving to the realization that God wants way more for us than that. So God can and will use our stories for His glory and give us a passion to help others do the same. With that in mind, I'd like to introduce to you Greg. I met Greg for the first time almost 15 months ago. And when he walked into counseling room number 3, he didn't say much. I got the idea that he really didn't want to be there and that he wasn't ready to let God take control. We spent several sessions together with very little traction, but little did he know that God was preparing his heart for what was to come. So Greg, welcome here. To start off, tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, your family, past and present, your work, and what contributed to your sex addiction.
That's a lot of questions.
Take them one at a time.
Yeah. I grew up in Richmond, in a Christian home. I'll keep it kind of vague, kind of surfacey for now, but didn't really take to church. Had to go to church every Sunday morning, Sunday night. Ended up hating it. My grandfather was the pastor, and I didn't feel like I belonged or anything like there. So I didn't really care to listen or be involved. I was more interested in playing soccer. Grew up, found out I was adopted, which kind of rocked my world. I found out, I think I was about 12 when they told me, and kind of lost my identity. Didn't know who I was, and I stayed that way. Through a series of events, it led me to Bible college, and didn't care there either. I started getting into probably the sex addiction part of it, not porn, because it was in the 80s that I started, just because I didn't have any validation. My parents didn't really talk to me or my brother very much. So fast forward, my dad passed away when I was 21, and that sent me into a spiral, just into sex. And it wasn't good, but that's where I was looking for my validity, and thought I would find it there, and then got trapped by the whole thing. Thought that I met my wife on actually Father's Day, my first Father's Day without my dad, at church, and thought that this girl could change me, and I wouldn't be that way anymore. Involved with sex. I would keep it in the marriage, and well, that just didn't happen. Unfortunately, the affairs started in my life, and then came clean at one point in time, and then tanked again shortly after that. And then I got into corrections, and that's where I really tanked. So I was a corrections officer for many years, still technically am, but I've been off on disability for 3.5 years. Just working on PTSD. I got diagnosed in 2015 with that. And it hit me when my wife and oldest son had their phones out calling the police on me, and I panicked and started bawling, and I ran and hid in my bathroom upstairs. My wife came up and said, "You need to leave." And I said, "No, I need help." And so thus began my journey to finding out more about PTSD. And yeah, the corrections world sucked though, because nobody cares about anybody sleeping with anybody. It's a breeding ground for affairs. You go through serious events, sometimes life or death events. And there was a few times where I was saying my goodbyes to my family because I didn't think I was coming home. And I'm covered in blood and feces and urine and the air, the gas that we use burning. It just wasn't cool. So you develop bonds with other officers when you go through a lot of those situations. And when you develop those bonds, you start to think, well, this, especially with some of the female guards, well, she gets me. She understands me. My wife at home doesn't understand me. So the enemies triggering my brain left, right, and center. Oh yeah, this girl, she knows what I'm going through. And so fast forward up until till I came in to see Dr. Dave, and wasn't overly excited to be here sitting in front of him.
No.
Oh.
Okay, so
Yeah.
So what led you and Currie to DFR then?
Well, I guess the road for me to DFR started maybe a year before. We started going to Southside Church in Chilliwack here, and the pastor seemed to have this knack of preaching to me, or that's what it felt like. And I didn't really want to be there, but every time he spoke, it seemed like he was telling you that you can't out-sin the cross. You can't out-sin the cross. And I'm like, want to bet? I'm doing it. And I can't come back to God. There's no way. You know, do you see what I've done? Have you seen the damage? And so I had a contemplation of whether to continue life or suicide. I had 7 friends from work in a 5-year period, I believe, 5 or 6 years. 7 friends commit suicide, and I felt like that seemed to be an option. So I get why they did that. I understand why, but just didn't happen. I didn't do it, obviously. So every song I listened to, every sermon I heard was always talking about, Jesus leaves the 99 and he goes for that one. I'm like, yeah. And you can't out-sin the cross. Come as you are. And I'm like, yeah, I heard this in Sunday school. Don't really care. And then I started to return to work. And then my marriage was just so bad. I was angry with everybody. I was treating everybody at home like crap, yelling constantly, angry, confused. My wife, without me knowing, started to look for divorce lawyers, and we walked in. She said, "This is our last chance." And we walked into Dr. Dave's office, and through the church, they set us up to see him, and said that they would cover part of our counseling. And I remember sitting down in Dr. Dave's office, and I'm thinking to myself, who is this guy? And like, no one talks. He was kind of, it seemed like what's the word I'm looking for?
Blunt.
But yeah, that's the word, blunt. And I don't like people being blunt with me. Being this hard-nosed officer who was angry and volatile, I'm sitting there going, he doesn't know that he can't talk to me like that. I should probably tell him, either that or I'm going to pop him in the mouth, one of the two. And then I'm like, nope, I shouldn't do that. That would be assault. That's not good. So I left, and we ended the meeting and left. And then I had a couple meetings with you. When I was back to work, I returned to a different prison. I was at the max for most of my career. I ended up getting this boils, I think, a heat rash from my neck all the way to the bottom of my feet. And I was burning day in and day out with these blisters and boils all over my body. And I don't know what happened. God said to me, are you done? Do I have your attention? And I said, yeah, okay. I'm done. I can't do this no more. It's either you or I pop myself off. And I said, I'm yours. And I gave my life back to him. I surrendered everything that I had. And then the first regroup on Thursdays that I went to was, when God forgives, he really forgives. And I'm like, okay, so this is something that I need to pay attention to. I just felt God was like, you need to listen, you need to focus. We're going to work on your identity here, because your identity is what suffered your whole life. And you've looked everywhere for your identity, but through me. And I'm like, okay. Self-esteem, I don't have one, or I didn't have one. I hated myself. And I thought, maybe you can't out-sin the cross. And that was my journey to DFR.
Okay, that's awesome. I mean, you covered a couple of things that I was going to ask next. I mean, I said what finally got you to the point when you were ready. It looks like you've covered that, because I know when we initially met, you definitely weren't ready. You weren't in a place to accept anything that Dave or I had to say. And yes, if any of us have met with Dave, and I think we probably all have, we know that he does not beat around the bush. That he likes to speak truth, and he doesn't really care how you're going to respond to the truth that he has to speak, God's truth. And yeah, so you talked a little bit about identity and stuff like that. So moving on from kind of building on that, what kind of journey did God take you on at the beginning of this? When you finally said, okay, I submit, I surrender, you've got it. What kind of stuff did God take you through in that process?
Oh, there were so many things. He spoke to me a lot through music. Actually, I started to get into this, what I've always said to the Thursday night guys, this garbage in, garbage out mentality. And so, I mean, the music that I listen to, is pretty typical, from classic music up to hardcore metal. but everything that I listened to usually revolved around sex. In the world, it's just huge. So I decided, no, I'm going to stop. No more Metallica. I'm going to find something Christian. And I did. And so he started to speak to me through music, always about my identity, always. And who I was, and the fact that for what I thought I was, I'm not. And things started to go from my head into my heart. And that's when the change really happened. But I remember that nothing happened until I surrendered. When Currie was going to DFR earlier than me, I saw all these things happening for her. And then I had this pity party on myself that went, why aren't these things happening to me? Why don't I get this free stuff? And I found out later, God was saying, well, you didn't surrender yet. I can't bless you and I can't walk with you if you don't surrender everything to me. I can pull the strings from behind the scenes. I can do all this stuff. But if you don't surrender and give me everything, I can't fully bless you the way you need to be blessed. So he taught me identity. I learned really quick, actually, through a series of events, what staying in your lane means. And I got this analogy from someone, and I wish I could remember. I've been racking my brain where I got this from. But in your marriage, you have like a trinity. There's you and your wife, and then God up top. And you guys are at the corners. And if you stay in your lane and work with DFR and you do your work that you need to do, you spend time in the Word, do your devotions, the only good in, only good out, your path curves like this. Here's me, here's my wife. And as we get closer to God, he brings our paths together. And it didn't happen for us until we both surrendered and we both stayed in our lanes. And man, that was hard, because there are times where I wanted to counsel her after, and I learned very quick I don't have the right to. I'm the one that caused all the pain. I'm the one that pulled up the dump truck full of shit and dumped it on her, and then walked away going, well, I'm somewhat free. And meanwhile, she's covered with this giant amount of crap that I just dumped on her. And we had this conversation one day because we got into this argument, and I was almost preaching, and then I realized, wait a minute, why am I doing that? That's stupid. I don't have the right to preach to her or even talk to her. And then we kind of gotten into an argument, and I said, well, you don't know what the enemy's saying to me. And she turns and says, that's not the point. You also don't know what the enemy is saying to me. So when we're arguing, I have the enemy telling me stuff, and I can't figure out why she's acting the way she's acting. Well, it turns out the enemy's talking to her too, trying to get her off track to butt heads with me. So I learned staying in your lane is the best way to validate, not violate, just by listening and then repeating back to her what she said, so she knows that I heard. That's such validation. We stopped, our arguments went way down, and we'd be here for a week if I was to try and tell you what all God is doing in my life. It's crazy. And just with working on my identity and my self-esteem was the big thing, because your identity, especially as a man, a guy, we're always wrapped up in we think our identity is mixed into what kind of work we do. Do we have a trophy wife? Do we have a nice body, working out? You're good looking. Yeah, good job. How much money you make? That's where our identity is. And for me, I looked for my identity in two places: sports, mainly soccer, and sex. And so as I started to go down this process, God was taking away a lot of the sexual addiction stuff and showing me different things of what I needed to work on. Anger, my PTSD. And then I have actually more acronyms behind my name than Dr. Dave, except mine suck. We've talked about this before. I got
Yes, we have.
I got ADHD now. I have SA and IA. I mean, those are crappy acronyms, to be behind your name, but they don't define me, and that's what I'm doing. And so then June hits, and June was a life changer for me. It was there was so many different things. There's so much I would love to say, but we don't have. We'd be here forever. So
yeah, maybe touch on a few things. I'd like this next question I had was how has God shown you his faithfulness? And so maybe touch a little bit about the Wounded Warriors, the men's weekend, all the little things that kind of have kind of proven to you kind of the work that God is doing in your life and how he's providing for you in more ways than just blessing you financially, but also just what he's doing in your and Corey's life.
Yeah. Well, we had the men's retreat in June. A week before that, not even a week before that, my wife is looking through her email and sees this email from Wounded Warriors. And if you don't know what Wounded Warriors is, it is for military and law enforcement to help out with PTSD in people. And we got invited to this COPE program, COPE, which stands for Couples Overcoming PTSD Every Day. And I'm like, well, why are we getting invited to this? Like, what's going on? Maybe just send an email back and just say, like, is this for real? Like, what's going on? So we get a message back saying that they've had a cancellation. Would you guys want to jump into this? And we're like, well, okay. I don't know anything about this. And then, I just lost my train of thought there. And then, yeah, so I didn't really know too much about Wounded Warriors, but I'm like, yeah, it sounds cool. I get to go work on PTSD a little bit, but I didn't really understand fully that it was actually couples overcoming PTSD every day. So I'm like, well, whatever, should be cool. And then I go to the men's retreat, which was just fantastic. Got to meet a whole bunch of really awesome guys, and the first men's retreat that I think I've ever been on. Because I'm not really a people person much anymore, due to my job. My lack of trust in people. To me, everybody's a criminal. So I go to the men's retreat, fantastic. Then a week later, I took two of my sons, my younger ones, to Loon Lake to fish. And I was nervous because I'm like, I don't want to screw this up. I've messed up their lives mentally for so many years. I don't want to screw this up. And we had a fantastic time. And it was just, I didn't get upset once, which is so not me. I was calm the whole time. It was just doing my devotions and my prayer, and God really made that week fantastic. And I come back and I find out that I have my, oh no, that's a different one. I lost my psychologist through WCB, and turns out that we get 6 months of counseling afterwards. So it's like, what? You know, we went to the COPE program on the island. Everything was paid for. Food, they give you a nice, the hotel is fantastic. Beautiful. It's in Souk on the island. They cover absolutely everything, and your ferry ride to go across. And I had light bulb moments going off on me left, right, and center. Probably one of the biggest ones, I would say, that I was just so excited that I was just one morning, a Tuesday morning when we were there, I went outside and was just kind of praying. And we were learning about how PTSD sits in the middle of marriage, and what it does, and how when my wife talks, there's this imaginary screen in the middle of it. It's a filter. And she says something, it hits the filter, PTSD changes it, and I hear something different. And then I erupt because I think she's some sort of a threat, you know? And so I'm outside just talking to God, this is really good info. Struggling, in this one area, like why I get so upset. And then he shares with me this little info. It's like, Greg, you sit upstairs, you sit out on your deck, and you're hiding from everybody. And I'm like, yeah. What are you doing when you're up there? And what's going through your brain? And I said, lots of things. Like, I run through scenarios from work. Like, what would I have done if I went into this situation differently? What about this? And my brain is going like 400 miles an hour, running through scenarios of work and hypervigilance. And what happens? God says, what happens when you go through the hypervigilance? And I'm like, oh, I'm jacked. Like, I'm just jacked. Like I'm ready to go off. And if somebody's threat comes in, I'm like, whoa, I get excited. I get to knock someone's head off. It's something like that. And he says, yeah, exactly. And then Currie comes in, and all she says is, Corey's my wife, for anybody that doesn't know. She says, hi. And I go, what? Who the hell do you think you are? You're interrupting my hypervigilance session here. You're interrupting my thought process. What, do you know what you're doing? And then I erupt. So what God taught me was, I was taking my emotion that was wrapped up in my hypervigilance state, and I transferred it over to Currie. And so I was attaching the wrong emotion to the wrong event. And all of a sudden, this light bulb just went off and said, that's it. That's what I'm doing. And I was like, what? This is the reason why I get so mad, for the dumbest reasons. And so it was crazy. I went inside and told Currie, and and I was bawling actually at this time, and I couldn't stop crying for the entire week that we were there. And I prided myself on being this tough, exterior person, somebody that you look at and you go, I don't really want to mess with that guy. That's what I wanted to be. And I'd lost that all. God was thawing me out and I'm bawling. And we started talking through the week that a lot of the guys that were there with their wives, a lot of us, the common thing was ADHD. And I'm like, yeah, whatever. They were like, you should get checked out. And I'm like, well, why would that matter? God's doing all this work in me. I'm thinking, ADHD, whatever. And then my wife's like, you should probably, that would explain a lot of things with you. And I'm like, okay, fine. So we get home from that week, which was just amazing. And I call my doctor, I go in, do these tests with him. And he comes back and says, you're like the poster child for ADHD. I'm like, what? And he's like, oh yeah, we're going to start you on some meds. I'm like, oh crap. So I'm like, yeah, okay. But it explains so much of why, because when I was growing up, my dad used to tell me I was stupid. And so I believed it, because he told me for many years that you're not the brightest kid, are you? And yeah, I don't think you're very smart. And struggling in school and everything. And I thought I was just stupid. And so ADHD taught me I'm not stupid. I'm actually quite intelligent, but the ADHD had my brain going like constantly like 100 miles an hour. So I'm on the meds, and now I'm starting to come down a bit. My brain is doing pretty good. I get fuzzy still a little bit, but one of the things that I do want to say is when we were on the island there for the Wounded Warriors, I had asked one of the first days if we could get a room with a balcony. I can sit out there. I can vape at night. I do my calming time. And I also use a little bit of medicinal at night. It helps to calm my brain down. So people don't really like that, right in the open at a hotel. So, and they're like, no, we don't have another room. And I'm like, crap, okay. We decided to stay an extra night, but they told us we couldn't because they were fully booked. So the last day, we're there on the Friday, they said, actually you can, we had a cancellation. And I had been bugging them all week about possibly, I wanted a balcony. I just love balconies. You sit outside and you can watch the seals in the water and the bald eagles, and just nature is so healing. And so we go up and we talk to them, and they're like, yeah, you can have this room, and it's for one night. And I went, okay. And they said, and it's got a balcony, so you can stop bugging us. And I'm like, really? Something as simple as that for me was just God saying, I got you. I'm going to give you a balcony one night just to say, I hear you. And I'm like, as stupid as that sounds to a lot of people, to me, it was just God saying, I'm here. I got you. And I'm going to bless you in different ways than maybe what you think you're going to be blessed in.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, fantastic. And we came home, and Currie and I started talking. And she realized she had actually contacted Wounded Warriors in 2015 when I got diagnosed. And it took them 7 years to invite us. And it was like 7 years. holy crap. It was like God knew, obviously. He's the master, like what we talked about before, Chris. He's the master stratego player, the master strategist. Doors are he's changing things behind the scene and you have no idea. And yet he's working for you because he loves you. And so 7 years, he waited for me to get right. And even 6-7 months ago, I wouldn't have been able to do this, to going to this. But he waited till I had released everything, and he was working through me and thawing me out and softening me up. And he was working, and then he gave me this blessing of going over there. We get back, the day we get back, the clinicians had emailed Currie and I to say, we would like it if you guys could be peer support for the next COPE program. We're like, what? What do you mean peer support? Well, as we saw how you guys just gravitated to everything, and you did what we asked you to do, and you did it awesome. And look at the benefits. We'd like to invite you back to be peer support. Well, that just doesn't happen, because you have to wait 6 months and then you have to apply to do that. And they asked us right at the beginning, when we got home. I'm like, absolutely. And then 2 weeks later, I get invited back to Wounded Warriors TRP program, which is the trauma response program. And I get to work on PTSD, specifically with the trauma of what I went through at work in prison. And so God was saying at the beginning, when I first came back to him, he's like, we're going to work on this. We're going to work on this. We're going to work on this, but not in the time frame that you think, in the time frame that I know of. And I watch it happening. A year later, I look back and I go, holy crap. He was working with me here, 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 and here. And now he's working on me here. He's covering all my bases. He's covering IA, SA, PTSD, and ADHD. All 4 of those stupid acronyms, he's covered. And he's covering, and he's doing a work in me. And one of the things that I had a meeting actually with Cam last week. We to work on IA, and the whole session was on identity. And again, it's not just a light bulb moment. It was more like a spotlight moment. This ginormous light that just went kaboom on me. And we talked about, do you look at yourself as a sinner? And I went, yeah, of course. Look, I'm a sinner. I can't deny that. And he goes, then if you look at yourself and you view yourself that way, then you are a sinner by faith. And I went, well, wait, what? That's a weird thought. I'm a sinner by faith. Yeah, because you look at yourself as a sinner. So why wouldn't you believe that you're a sinner? So you do those things. And I'm like, okay, that kind of makes sense. He goes, now we got to change our focus, because God's identity in you makes you a saint who sometimes sins. And I went, wait, what? A saint? You're talking like you're on crack now, man. What do you mean? And we went through it all, and it was like, holy cow. My identity is wrapped up in him. And I was thinking that, for so long you couldn't, I out-sinned the cross. And God was like, nope, you can't do that. It's impossible. If you think then you can out-sin the cross, then you're on a whole other level than any other human being. And I went, okay. Yeah, okay. And so he started, like, it was my identity. I learned through everything, sexual addiction and even IA is all based on your identity. You've lost it. You don't even know who you are in Christ. And you spend so much time searching everywhere for your identity. And you miss the one place that you can only find it. And low self-esteem, I can guarantee probably most of us on this call, if not all of us, struggle with low self-esteem. And that's why sexual addiction reared its ugly head, because Satan knows that. And he uses that to knock us down. And when I was watching, I watched a lot of porn for the last 3-4 years before a year ago when I stopped. And I used it to help me sleep at night. Or so I thought. The last time I used porn was September 15th of last year. And I remember thinking to myself, oh, you need to watch this. You can't fall asleep. You need to remember, this is your way to fall asleep. And I remember looking back going, holy crap. I see how the enemy's speaking to me and using subtle little things like sleep to get me to watch porn. And when I started to say no, and then I put covenant eyes, and people were like, oh, you can get around that. I'm like, I don't really want to get around it. I'm done with that. I can't. Look where it took me. Down the road of almost suicide, hammered me. So for me, identity, and I'm still learning stuff, and I think you'll still learn stuff for most of your life of your identity and who you are in God. But once you get to that spot where you fully understand, and it goes from your head to your heart, your identity in Him, that's when things really start to get going for you. That's where He really starts to bless you. But you have to surrender. That's the key to the whole thing. Surrendering. Don't hold on to even one little bit. Right? Like when we've talked about, Chris, Ananias and Sapphira, right? They gave all their riches except for maybe a tiny bit. And look what happened to them. How'd that work? So I looked at that and I went, okay, I got to surrender it all. Got to surrender it all.
Yeah.
No plan. Got to surrender.
Yeah. Well, Greg, I know we could go on for hours.
Yeah.
I am so excited for what God's doing in your life. Thank you so much for sharing your story with these gentlemen and with the rest of the groups that will meet this week, and in perpetuity. This will be on YouTube. And so, yeah, guys, just thanks for listening. And we hope that that Greg's story provided a little bit of encouragement for you. Life goes best when you surrender to God. And so we just want to affirm that. And thanks for listening, guys.
See you guys.